Most martial arts teach techniques. You learn a punch, a block, a takedown, but combat does not happen in techniques. Combat happens in conditions. Here is why that distinction matters. You walk into most schools and they hand you a list, 20 punches, 10 blocks, 5 takedowns. You learn each move, practice it on a bag, and test for your next belt. The problem is combat does not present itself as a list. Combat is a living exchange between two people moving, adjusting, responding. When you rely on a list, you learn vocabulary without grammar. You know the words but cannot form sentences. You freeze against an opponent who moves unpredictably. Technique-based training creates technicians. Condition-based training creates fighters. You need to shift your focus from collecting moves to reading situations. A condition-based curriculum asks a different question. What situations do you need to handle? Instead of accumulating techniques, you learn to navigate categories of engagement. Different distances from far to close. Different timings, acting first or reacting. Different roles, initiating or responding. Different skill interactions, facing a striker or a grappler. Within each condition, you have multiple appropriate responses. The technique becomes secondary to reading the situation. You learn not just what to do, but when to do it, why it works, and how to adapt when the situation shifts. This produces practitioners who solve problems in real time, not just repeat memorized patterns. The obstacle to condition-based training is the numbers. If you try to train every possible condition explicitly, you drown in permutations. Different distances times different timings times different roles. The multiplication is relentless. Most schools ignore this problem. They stick to techniques because techniques are finite. They hope you will figure out the conditions on your own. Some students do, most do not. The solution is not to ignore the infinite. It is to filter it. You need to identify which conditions actually occur in combat, which distances matter, which timings repeat. Train the core patterns thoroughly, and the variations take care of themselves. Combat does not happen at every possible inch. It happens in recognizable bands, far enough to be safe, close enough to engage, too close for certain options. Train these bands and the specific measurements become intuitive. The same applies to timing. The rhythms of combat follow patterns. Sometimes you act alone. Sometimes both act together. Sometimes one acts multiple times within the other's response window. These patterns repeat regardless of the specific techniques used. You do not need to memorize every possible distance and timing. You need to recognize the bands and patterns that actually appear. Train those, and you handle the variations. Every practitioner faces situations where they must react to an opponent's action. Every practitioner also faces situations where they must initiate before the opponent acts. You need to train both roles. Do not favor one over the other. The same applies to skill interactions. You will face strikers. You will face grapplers. You may face someone who does both. Each interaction creates different threats and different opportunities. You need to train the core patterns for each, not every possible combination. When you understand the roles and interactions, you adapt to the infinite variations between them. This is how you move from memorizing moves to owning the fight. The shift from technique-based to condition-based training changes everything. You stop asking what moves to learn. You start asking what situations to handle. You stop drilling isolated techniques against no resistance. You start practicing responses within realistic conditions. You stop hoping the pieces will come together. You build a framework that handles the chaos. This is the difference between knowing how to punch and knowing how to fight. Condition-based training produces practitioners who read the fight, adjust to the opponent, and execute the right response at the right time. You become a problem solver, not a pattern repeater. That is the goal. Stop collecting techniques. Start training conditions. That is the path to genuine competence. Train smart, train specific, own the fight.